Hi friend, welcome to another Paint With Me video. Today I'm going to be painting this sketch. First I'm going to be outlining it though, so I'm using this pen that I got recently at my local art store. I like this pen because it allows me to get a varied amount of line widths, and I can kind of vary the pressure to get some texture. So you see here I am getting a little texture in the beanie, and I'm outlining the face of this guy. So this piece was inspired by a visit to a brewery out in Oregon. I was visiting some family, and we went to this bar that was inside of a little shed on the property of the brewery. This character is inspired by what I saw there. The bartender had to keep this wood stove running for the customers to stay warm inside. It wasn't very cold there, it was probably in the 50s, 60s range. But it was very sort of nostalgic to see someone tending a stove and also making whiskey drinks. So I thought I would paint some scene about that. So you can see I'm moving on to some wider strokes on this guy's clothing. Something that I've really gotten into over the course of the past year has been trying to get back into the line work for clothing, getting the wrinkles right. Getting those wrinkles to look right is pretty tricky, and I used to be really, really good at it. So it has been a journey to try and learn them again. You can see I'm kind of using some of my tricks that I've learned that I sort of remember from working on manga style work, where there's these sort of back and forth little strokes to get a nice little crease in the clothing that's kind of loose. And I'm trying to keep the lines more gathered, where there's a lot of extra fabric, and more loose and separated and distant from one another, where there is much less gathering in the fabric. It also helps with some of the perspective of this piece, so kind of having a few lines around this guy's torso area makes it look like there is a little bit of distance being applied to his torso, so the top of his torso is kind of closer to us, and then the bottom part is a little further away. So as I'm outlining this guy's hands here, I'm kind of regretting taking a break from doing a lot of hands. I've forgotten so much of what I learned when I was a teenager, when I was doing a lot of art. In, the past 10 years of not doing a lot of art and being a working adult. So while it feels kind of good to step back into this mode of creating something and drawing stuff, I know that I have a long ways to go to get back to even the level I was of anatomy and accuracy and posing and things like that. My hands are definitely a little awkward at the moment, but we're embracing it. This whole piece is sort of awkward in a way, sort of forced perspective, and it's an imagined scene that I drew from my brain. So that's always going to provide some challenges making it look realistic. think is why I kind of leaned into a little bit more of a cartoony vibe for this guy. He's got a little bit of realism to him, but it's not realistic, I'd say. It's a more illustrative style. So, yeah, I'm going back in and adding a little bit more shadows, I suppose, here and there. Tried to add in a collarbone. Didn't really work, I think, there. But when I paint this, it's going to be pretty shadowy right there anyway, so. I'm starting to imagine where I'm going to be laying in my really dark shadows here. So you can see I was much less precious about those lines at the bottom of the torso than near the top of the torso or on the arm that's closest to us. And now I'm going to kind of fake it with these legs here. Since I didn't really want to play with the anatomy so much, I just had fun with it. I just put the legs where it seemed natural to put them, and adding a lot of gathered fabric lines here. Kind of trying to add in a backside here. And again, knowing that this is going to be a pretty shaded part of the piece, I'm having a heavier line and not being so precious about how distant the lines are. I just wanted this to be kind of a vibe. So this piece is intended to kind of give you the feeling of being cozy, being around a fire. What that feels like. That moment when you start to feel the warmth of the fire kind of coming toward you. Maybe you feel a little bit of hot air on your face. If you've ever been around a wood stove that's like heating a large space, you kind of know the feeling. So now I'm finishing sort of the back leg. Trying to get a little bit of detail in his shoe. Trying to make the boot look like a boot in a way. But no, I know I'm kind of fighting a losing battle here. Because it's obstructed. But getting those little teeth in definitely helped, I think. Anytime there's kind of perfect symmetry, or two things that are supposed to look very similar, I always struggle with that. I'm not someone that is able to kind of reproduce the same exact shape over and over again. I don't know, I have a looser style, so. So yeah, as I've been thinking about those shadows on the back part of the body, or the bottom part of the legs and everything, I'm going back in now and I'm going to add a little bit more for the side that's facing us. Kind of knowing that this side is supposed to be a little bit further away than the shoulder. So the shoulder area doesn't really have any like wrinkles or lines or anything for the clothing folds. But the torso is still going to have a few kind of going down the side, so I tried to get that lined up. For the back arm, it's pretty simple, just a couple of wispy lines there. Kind of covering up the, knowing that's going to be covered up in mostly shadow there. Alright, I'm trying to make some somewhat straight lines here without a ruler, so it looks like metal. But as per usual, I can't draw a straight line, so that's why we have rulers, I think, you know? People tell me all the time, oh, I could never draw it, I can't even draw a straight line. And I always think to myself, I never draw a straight line. That's what rulers are for, right? So as I'm finishing this main part of the body of the wood stove, I'm regretting that I did not study the feet of the wood stove very much. All I know is they have this little, a lot of them have this little windmill thing that spins faster and faster as it heats up. I'm not really sure how the physics of that thing works, but I think it's really cute. So I decided to include it here. And then we gotta get the chimney in here. Yeah, seeing this wood stove in the middle of a bar, a tiny shed, concrete, like, cinder block shed, was kind of cool. They probably added it after the fact. This property that this place was on was originally a agricultural family home, so the shed was probably used for storing grain, storing maybe animals. It was nearby a barn. Don't know if you can hear my dog sighing in the background. He's resting. Okay, so the background, I remembered there being sort of a wall around the back of the wood stove so that people wouldn't bump into it. So that's what most of my background is here. And then I'm adding in these cinder block bricks. From what I remember, they were just kind of painted white. But kind of trying to think about how I'm going to paint them. A lot of times I'll go with the red tones or brick, classic brick tones, but when I sketched this piece, I was pretty sure I wanted to go with like a warm and cool complementary color scheme. So as I'm just kind of getting these vertical lines in, you can see I totally messed up that last one. Trying to make some bricks that sort of have some perspective to them. Definitely flubbing the last row there, but you know what? It's not the focus. We're gonna keep it loose. We're gonna keep it chill. Not gonna worry too much. So in the very back of this, I'm trying to add in a little bit more detail, but looser so that it doesn't look so defined. It gives it a sense of kind of receding into the background and being much further away from the viewer. But I did want to add in a little bit more than sort of what I had in my sketch, so it's always risky for me. Sometimes I get this right, sometimes it doesn't turn out how I think it's gonna turn out. But it always allows me to learn something about how I want to end up drawing the next thing. So I'm kind of drawing in where I remember the bar part of this bar being, which was right behind the wood stove. There's sort of a empty distance with some chairs and tables. It's not a very big structure. There's a little space between this little wall for the wood stove and the bar space where the bartender, this guy apparently, would be mixing drinks and had all his glassware and things like that. So now I'm going to add in some of the metal shading onto the wood stove. I just find that if I don't do this step, then harder materials or materials that have that like a stronger reflective type texture, they don't look as good if I don't do this. So even if it's not a realistic piece, I like to try and practice my cross-hatching and shading when I can. So this is just trying to add some depth and a little bit of realism to the stove. so you know what it is. If I just painted it flat, that would probably look okay too, but this allows me to get a little bit of that texture in that I know is going to come out when I start adding in the color on the other parts of the piece. But if I just painted it flat, it's not going to have the same level of texture as the rest of it. So this takes a little bit. Very meditative. Big, strong lines. Up and down, back and forth. You can see what I mean about the lighter pressure of this pen. It really shows off the texture of the paper. So because this paper is not the smoothest texture, but it's not super toothy, get a little bit of sort of blank spots in the line. Pretty much done with this right now, so I'm going to add the date. I'm going to zoom out here and I'll show you a little bit of the erasing process. It takes a while to erase, sometimes get all the little nooks and crannies out of this paper. So I'm probably going to cut a little bit of this time I spent erasing out, but alright, so now we're moving on to the painting step now that I've sufficiently erased the pencil lines. I'm starting out with a light wash inside of what I know is going to eventually be the strongest point of warm light. But I know that I want to start by kind of getting a feel for where my light highlighted warm spots will be. There's my dog moving around. So as I'm highlighting these spots, I'm trying to think of where the light is coming from the wood stove and kind of the angle that I'll be entering the room in. It's kind of this funnel of light. And I'm keeping the color really light here because if I go too dark, then I know that I won't be able to like get the contrast that I want from the light parts of the skin and the wood and everything else. And then the sort of bluer areas of shadow that I know I'm going to end up having. So the painting part at this stage is pretty simple, but I'm kind of setting the groundwork for what I'm going to do next. While I'm with this lighter color, I know I want to go in and wash over the wall in the background here so that I have a much lighter base to start with, knowing that I'm going to want to make it seem like that concrete wall is a white painted wall. So I want it to be a much lighter sort of color than the bartender's clothing, for example. So I'm going to keep it pretty light. And then now what I'm going to do is add in some of the glow on the floor. So the glow from the stove is going to give us a nice, strong, warm glow since the door is open on the floor. That's kind of where I think the light would fall first. Now I'm mixing in a little bit of red into my orange. I'm going to go in with a little bit more of that warming tone for some of the areas that are still going to be sort of warm toned or warm lit, but are going to have a little bit more shadow than the areas I've already covered. And if this was a more realistic piece, I probably would have started with sort of this mid-tone and then moved up from there, but this kind of allows me to know where I'm going next, starting with the lightest and brightest sort of areas and then working into the darker ones. I think the only thing I don't really like about this technique is if you're working with a non-watercolor paper and you do, 5 or 6 layers of your darker colors or shadow colors over top, it can make the paper pretty wrinkly, which you'll kind of see at the end of this probably, where this paper is not really meant for this level of watercolor, but you know what, it's what I had with me. Sometimes you gotta use what you have. And it's not like have big, grandeur ideas for this piece. It's something I wanted to capture, and if I like the idea in the future, I might, make it into something else. But I would recreate it then, use different paper and maybe some different techniques to capture it. So next I'm gonna add in some much more intense orange color into this piece. So this is gonna be the main kind of glow effect for our fire. I probably won't add too much more after I add this layer into the fire part of the wood stove here. But I knew I wanted a little bit more of that deep glow on some of the pieces of the piece. So I'm going in with what's left on my brush and trying to add in some of that. And then I'll pick up the rest of the color I mixed and try to give a little bit more of that warm glow on what would still be catching light, but maybe is a little bit more in shadow. So you can kind of see how even that middle part there of the leg that's closest to us has already gotten about 3 layers of watercolor on it. You can already see how this technique will sometimes overload the paper. I don't tend to use a ton of water when I'm working in this style of having some sections that are sort of small and sharp and various colors and values, so I think that works to my advantage when I'm not using the most ideal paper. So next I've brought in a little bit of brown, kind of like a sienna brown. You can't really see it from this shot, but brought in a little bit of brown with my yellow to get some of the boot and arm and sections like that. Then I got kind of bored of that. I just hopped back into using my brighter orange to start to give the bricks behind the bartender a little bit of a wash there. Trying to keep it loose and relaxed. I'm going to start in now with a little bit of the blue, start to get some of those shadows. And again, I'm using a pretty light navy wash here. It's because I don't want to go too dark yet, not knowing exactly where I want to put the deepest shadows, and knowing that I kind of need to transition some of these warmer sections. So you'll kind of see that I'm keeping it pretty loose. I kind of let the brush fall into some of these creases of the clothing, and that sometimes helps me figure out how I want the shadows to fall. So in some ways the brush helps me decide that, just by what feels most natural for it to kind of settle into. Yeah, with the arm I wanted to make sure to leave a good amount of light spots on it so you could really tell that it was forward in space. Bit of challenge for me, knowing that I do want to have some contrast in this piece, but it's a good exercise to kind of force myself to think in the negative space. Yeah, now I'm working on his face a little bit, some of the shadows on his face here. If you noticed, I put quite a bit of orange into most of the areas of the face, knowing that, you know, skin is going to have kind of a warmer glow than clothing, so having a little bit of that navy on top of orange will make it look a little bit more like a living being as opposed to, you know, some clothing, some fabric. You can see that I'm going over what I've already done with a sort of deeper orange color with the navy blue to put in the shadows for the clothing and for some of the spots on the body. This is nice because it kind of allows me to get a naturally deeper value than if I were to kind of try and mix it just in one layer of watercolor. And then I can decide while I'm painting it where the real shadows and real light parts are going to be. So for example, I'm painting this guy's arm. I've just realized that the log is going to be blocking a good amount of the light on this side, so I decided to fill it in with a good amount of blue. Now I'm popping in a little bit of the sort of spot shadows, cast shadows from the bartender's boot and from his knee. And I got bored again, so I'm going in to the background, giving it a nice blue wash, knowing that this light is not gonna cast itself past this. The Woodstove light is not gonna cast its warm light past this concrete wall that I've put up. So knowing that, being able to drop in a little bit of the blue shadow here will give me a sense of where some of those deeper shadows are going to be to sort of finish this off. Next I'm going in with a little bit more of an intense yellow. So we've been using mostly oranges, a little bit of brown, but I'm adding in some yellow to, again, add in a little bit more contrast, give the sense of that glow. But I want to use it sparingly because I know that the more I use it, the less effective that it's it's gonna be. And right on top of it, I'm gonna add in some of this navy wash to show some of the cast shadows right over top. What we're gonna end up with is some of the browns from the orange and the navy sort of mixing together, but we're also gonna get some greens, which will give this a little bit more of a lively look, not a pure complementary color scheme. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit so that you can see what I'm working on with the folds of the clothing. Trying to get some areas that are a little bit deeper shadowed, while still leaving a few highlights here and there to kind of show the texture. I am working with a little bit of a larger brush than I probably should be for this type of work, but this is the brush that I had with me, prepped for this this piece. Now you can see I'm adding in a little bit of a deeper navy to some of these shadows. Starting to really think about what needs to be truly blue because it's been blocked from this light. Can be left alone. Get some of those deeper shadows, but also make sure that things don't like stick out too much. So that elbow looks like it's sticking out a little bit much right now. Put a little light wash on it so it matches the same kind of color texture, I guess, value texture of the other parts of the arm. I'm going to continue kind of adding shadows here and there until it kind of feels right that there's enough shadow to tell where the darkest parts of the room are. There's definitely some background piece I need to drop in here with a little bit of blue underneath our wood stove and kind of around the wall and around the glow that we put in the floor earlier. Working on the wall a little bit here, and you can't really see it. How much I zoomed in, but I'm trying to add some shadows sort of on the edges of the bricks. Starting to get some of the definition in the stove next will be my goal. Kind of want this little pinwheel to stand out a little bit, but I also know that it'd be kind of weird. And the movement of it, when those things really get going, they just look like circles. So I'm adding in almost like cross-hatching lines, but with my navy here. And getting some shading on the door. Drop in some more darker, wetter layers here in the background of the stove. Starting to give a little bit more definition with these darker layers here. I wanted a dark area of the face so you can kind of get that dramatic lighting effect. So drop that in, then adding a little bit more shading to the hat. Didn't feel like that was quite shaded enough. Here I was kind of like, what shape is a hat? Are there pieces that I can shade or add texture to? And now we're getting to the end here. And we have it. Cozy fire bartender Woodstove situation. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know in the comments if you like this style of paint with me video. See you next time.